And so, yeah, at first, please tell us something about your musical education.
Sure. I grew up in New York City, and from the time I can remember, music was very central to my self-expression. I hear from my parents that I chose the violin very insistently, and I started lessons when I was 4. And I had, pretty much a conservatory, thorough classical education through college, and at various times, considered entering the classical performance world. But at the same time, my musical interests were very varied. I've also been writing songs forever, and I also have always been very engaged with music technology. Even, as a middle schooler, I started learning about synthesis, and I got my first synthesizer, I think 6th grade, something like that. And also have always been drawn to improvisation and forms where composition and improvisation are intertwined or indistinguishable. So I think, at the time that I was coming up as a violinist, there were not that many improvisers certainly not in my peer group. But I'm glad that I kind of, nonetheless, kind of took it upon myself to keep doing things that were, not by the book. And so I was composing, and I've studied a lot of different kinds of music over time. I've played in jazz groups and country groups, and studied music from various countries around the world. And I went to Yale for my undergraduate, and after that I spent a few years in New York composing and doing sound design for theater. And then when I went to graduate school at Cal Arts, I was kind of continued to expand my interests. It was a great place to do that. So, I can elaborate on various influences and teachers and stuff, but that was the basic trajectory of where I went to school. And I think having that strong extracurricular temperament to kind of just seek everything out everywhere was also formative for me. I think by the time I got out to grad school, I started to see more reflections of people who had the span of interests that I had. But at the time, at least, Cal Arts was very unique in that, I was there for a master's in composition that focused in new media, interactive technology, and programming. But I also was able to spend a lot of time in improvisational ensembles, studying with great teachers like Wadada Leo Smith and John Bergamo. And I was able to even take some tabla with Swapan Chaudhry. And so, there are so many wonderful influences, and a little bit of a non-hierarchical structure that allowed me to pursue various things at the same time, even though it was within an advanced degree program setting.
Wow. Sounds great. And I've read that you learn violin too from Erick Friedman and Svi Zeitlin. And how was it to learn from them, from the great names?
It was great. I think you kind of in the good situations you learn why people have a reputation for being an important teacher. So I would say in the case of Erick, his whole focus in a way was to demystify the instrument in terms of the technical aspects, which I think is such a healthy thing to do, because really it is physics. This is quite technical, but I think it's worth talking about. I think in string teaching, there are many approaches that somehow emphasize, well, how does your hand look when you're doing this or that? And he really understood that everybody's skeleton really is set up a different way. And so really what we want to focus on is what do we want the instrument to be doing, and how do we need to work with our particular physiology to make that adjustment? Because it's really physics and balances and levers. And I think reducing the technical to its constituent elements is so helpful, because then it opens up, there's no reason why that needs to be the hard part, right? I mean, I think that the music making is what's interesting. And so rather than making a mountain out of technical issues, trying to kind of efficiently address them, that idea of efficiency is also something I got from him. And Zvi was also a real advocate of pre-thinking, so pre-imagining a sound, a pitch. And we know from a lot of brain studies, when we imagine movements, we're actually starting to fire those muscles. So it's like in pre-imagining a sound or an action, you're training your brain as well and kind of creating readiness in the muscles. So that was a really highly effective way to approach practice. So I think, and then in an improvisational setting, a lot of these things come into play, of course, as well. Kind of the more nimble you can be with your ideas, then the more responsive you can be in articulating them.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And yeah, I don't think I have to ask which instrument is your favorite, because I think it's the violin, or am I wrong?
Well, it's definitely, I would say, voice and violin are kind of the instruments that are second nature, in that it feels like there's no daylight. But I also really love expanding my palette of instruments. I am also a guitarist. I play a lot of string instruments of every kind, really. And scoring brings kind of an environment to me where I not only can, but sometimes need to add different instruments to my vocabulary. So I have kind of a growing menagerie of percussion and string instruments, and maybe sometime I'll add wind instruments to that vocabulary. And of course, keyboards are all over the place in the studio here too. And the language of computer synthesis and sound design for me is also really, really central to my way of thinking. So I'd almost put electronics and computers way up there, because it's really, those are instruments and tools that allow me to actually bring reality to some of the things that I'm hearing in my head. And for a while when I was growing up, the technology was not, I would say, not quite there yet. And now it's arrived at a place where, I would say that we've gotten almost everything is possible, So it's been an exciting time recently just to have the facility that the technology offers, because it's starting to mirror some of the ideas about workflow that I have always had.
And yeah, what was your very first film score?
My very first film score, that is a good question. I think it was almost positive, it was a short called Come Nightfall. I'd done a couple of films in tandem or, with others, but in terms of like the first, I would say, kind of complete score where I was really, the composer and not just contributing element, was for that short, which actually ended up at the Sundance Film Festival. And so, although it was a short, it was quite well regarded. And, it was, I think right when I started, I was kind of doing as many projects as I could, no matter how small, just because I think that I was hungry for that experience. And it's a good thing to do when you're starting out.
And yeah, so in general, what is inspiring you?
Well, that's a very large question, but if we kind of make it more manageable by talking about the area of scoring, I think one of the reasons why I've gravitated towards scoring is that the story itself, the story world of any film, gives you a starting point for your imagination, and then those anchors can be very fruitful, and you end up being able to find whatever you need within those boundaries and parameters of the story itself. So I find it very inspiring to work in, I love to write pieces that, aren't necessarily narratively based, but I do spend a large portion of my time interacting with narrative and composing in relationship with narrative. And I think I find that very inspiring, because it also feels like, the music is going to reach people. It's relevant. It's, and you're finding a language in concert with many, many others, from the actors to obviously the directors and writers and cinematographers. You're in a big conversation, and are kind of responsible for the musical component of that world.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, what do you think is the best thing about composing?
The best thing about composing, there are so many. We could talk all day. I think that the fluidity of the medium of music is very appealing to me, because it can both, I think it has many attachments and meanings that sometimes depend on context, obviously, but there's also a fluidity to the language that it can morph into something else. It's a great connector and a great bridge. And, essentially there's an element of it is just a spiritual medium on some level. It's a connecting thing. Mm-hmm. And even just the fact that I think it's the fact that it also, by its nature, evolves. Even a song, every time it's performed, it shifts a little, it changes. And of course, in the hands of improvisers, it does that even more. So it engages something that I think is very interesting about setting up definitions and then exploding those definitions. There's manifests a lot of formal questions that I think are universal formal questions to all media in a way that's very elegant. I'm also a visual artist and a writer, and I enjoy working in different media. I think what appeals to me there with music is that that X factor of abstraction. It's both concrete and abstract.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, is there something that makes it less fun for you?
Not really, honestly. Yeah, I think in any human activity, you're going to have challenges and things to learn and bumps in the road or whatever. But essentially, the medium itself, it's not like there's something I wish were different about it.
And yeah, when you compose, what are the steps from the first notes to the complete score?
So with a score, I think for me the process is quite different than for a standalone mm-hmm. piece, a concert piece, or a song that doesn't relate to a picture. When I'm in the scoring process, it does vary with the project to some degree. Sometimes I will get involved in the script phase, which means that I may be writing themes and creating materials away from picture and just with based on discussions in the script. And then we might start cutting stuff in, and then it becomes a growing conversation with the creative heads about, what we want to develop in this language. And then sometimes as I start getting scenes, then I'll write more directly to picture. When I get something that's closer to locked, there is still usually a period of some, thematic development ahead of time. But I would say that, you kind of know, not influencing what is going to be shot, right? I mean, you're given something that has a certain look and feel already, and so you're joining a world that's slightly more fully realized. But you can have just as big of an impact. It's just you're entering at a different phase. And I mean, I do write away from the computer, but when I'm scoring to picture, it's usually I'm working with the picture very specifically. So in the case where I've recorded or created a theme away from picture, then I'll bring that in a bin of materials that's available for me when I'm working for picture. But ultimately, I'm very involved in the process of how the music is going to relate to the picture.
And do you play the instruments by yourself, or do you have a few musicians or?
When I've done, sometimes I'm recording with an orchestra, and a lot of times, even with large ensemble recordings, I will be combining those with other elements that are programmed in the studio. This all kind of depends on the scope of the budget and the needs of the film. So there are definitely quite a few projects where I have performed all the instruments, recorded them in my studio, and incorporated them with programmed elements. I try to, always do right by the story. So, even if there's a limited budget, I really try to think about what live elements are really required to bring this music to life.
Great.
But I think it's definitely great to have the flexibility and the ability to articulate oneself by playing. It's always great to be a player, in addition to a composer in the scoring process. It's very useful.
Well, what can you tell me about The Sinner? Well,
we got nice news, I think yesterday, announced that we've been renewed for a 4th season. So hooray for that. It's, I think, a very unique show in that it is a psychological thriller, which is a why-done-it rather than a who-done-it. It goes deep. It's not going case by case every week. It's one case for the whole season. And it's also an anthology with continuity. So each season we're entering a new psychological world because the person who's perpetrating the crime is not somebody we've met before. But the thread of continuity comes from Bill Pullman's character, Detective Harry Ambrose, who provides, a through line and is a very interesting mirror image sometimes of his suspects. His psychological profile is very interesting, and it tends to deepen and darken as the seasons continue. And what I've really loved about it is that music definitely plays a large role in the storytelling. There's an emphasis on it bringing something fresh and innovative to the genre. And in terms of musical development, it's kind of ideal because every season I bring a lot of new material, and I also am enveloping that in a larger narrative that has to have coherence. So as a musical project on a kind of conceptual scale, a compositional scale, it's exciting. When you write a score for a film, an hour and a half or 2 hours, and then the story is over in terms of your contribution to it. And with a series with multiple seasons that actually really relate to each other in an interesting way, as a musical project, it's formally very exciting.
Yeah, I've listened to the music Andrew has sent me. Yeah, it sounds great. A little bit dark and very, I don't know how to describe it. Interesting. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, I would say, I love it, and I probably use 1 or 2 for Halloween. So, yeah.
Certain ones are particularly suited to that. And certain cues, I'm sure, are suited to that.
Yeah, it sounds interesting, the show, and I hope I could see it sometimes, one time. Yeah, sounds great, and looking forward. And and also I listened to Limetown, a little bit Irish and dark, and wow. And what can you tell me about this?
Well, Limetown is it's a cool project because it engages questions of technology and humanity and how these two things might intersect. And it obviously does take a dark view of what can happen, but I think language-wise, we arrived at this, in many places, very organic orchestral vocabulary that is intertwined with almost impalpable dark processing and sound elements, hopefully creating something that does have that menacing, dread-inducing effect. But I think that there's a lot of pathos in the stories of the individual characters, and there's also a sense of detachment, estrangement, and alienation, and so giving voice to those things is very interesting. Also, a lot of the episodes were really scored through. It's almost operatic. So that's always an interesting project, because I think you don't want it to feel artificial, but there are just some projects that really are designed to have a lot of music in them. So I think how you approach that when you choose to make the score come forward and when you're weaving a fabric that sits more as a support. It's a very dynamic relationship, and you end up having to think, again, in a very writerly manner, planning out how the score is going to shift its functionality. I think that's one other really beautiful thing about scoring is that the score isn't one thing. It doesn't do one thing. It shifts its function according to what's going on in that scene or in that part of a scene. And you can shift perspectives through music in the course of a scene. I think that's a place where the fluidity of the medium, it comes in very handy.
Oh yeah, I love this aspect from music. Because something you see is not what you hear. Let's say a happy couple on a somewhere, and then dark music. So, oh my God, what happens next? So yeah.
Right, exactly. And that relationship can change. Sometimes you're really reinforcing that happy moment, and choosing. I think you end up having a meta signature sometimes of, you don't want to always be relating the same way, and shifting those expectations for the audience can help them feel engaged.
And and one of your stage works is the piece Departures, in which you combine a jazz ensemble with visual instruments. That sounds very interesting. Can you tell me more about it?
Piece Departures. So that was actually, it's a piece written for an improvising jazz ensemble in interaction with live performed computer visuals and audio. And so, and it was actually modeled after, kind of basing its movement from the core issues of the one-on-one scenes in Casablanca. So it's kind of an early example of, this is very nonlinear in certain ways in terms of how it relates to stories. It's not at all conceived of as a score by any means, but the way that the instruments interact are conceived of as kind of how characters might interact. And, the last movement takes the shape of a flight pattern or a takeoff, and is kind of fractally built from many small takeoffs in a musical sense. So just to give you a kind of a broad idea, it is a good example of, in a concert piece, how I might weave narrative inspiration with cutting edge technology in terms of the interactivity of players and content.
And what is the special aspect of writing for the stage for you?
Oh, for the concert stage?
Yeah, or a theater stage.
Well, those are very different. I think, theater stage, it's more similar, unless you're writing an opera or, I have done, I have written kind of a rock opera. And, I think when you're in a musical theater form where song is primary, that's one category. Immersive theater is another category I've been involved with a lot. Those two are quite different from a case where you're maybe writing a bumper to take somebody from one scene to another. So, which tends, I think, to be a little bit less, captivating for composers sometimes. But in terms of the concert stage, I mean, the biggest thing is the freedom. It's like a blank canvas, and ultimately it's about you satisfying your own vision. And so I think it's really nice to have that component alive, because there's a kind of expression that I think both are important. I think that when you're collaborating with others and answering to some of their needs and vision together, you end up learning a lot. And I would say it deepens my toolkit, because I end up going certain places that maybe on my own I would not have gone because of the particular place that I'm visiting, and I think I bring back those tools to my work on my own. But I think it's very important when you're in a very collaborative field to have a space for yourself where you are the one that you're answerable to, in a sense. And if they're also, just on a meta formal level, you can do a lot of kinds of experimentation that aren't as possible in a commercial context. And people are kind of hoping for that. And at this point, I think it's become a space where at least one of the functions of concert music is to provide a place where innovation can happen. So, I think overall, depending on the kind of music you're doing, obviously, but I think, in contemporary classical music, if you're doing anything experimental, the audience will probably be smaller, but there's you can observe a lot of influences of experimental music on current scoring, I think. And I mean, that's not necessarily the point of doing it, but I think that it's important to remember, when the audience is smaller, that it's still having a ripple effect and an impact. There's no music that's made in a vacuum, which is part of why it's so valuable.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I read that you are a pioneer in reimagining film scores for live performances. I would like to know more about that.
Sure. So I started to do live remixes, I guess is the simplest way to present it, about 10 years ago or so. I've always been kind of drawn to modular composing techniques and to kind of, I don't know exactly how to say, electronic music culture in a broad sense, and kind of the way that it deconstructs and reconstructs it, depatterns and repatterns, and gives us an opportunity to reimagine existing materials. And in that way, I think it's kind of a contemplation on the essence of reality. So, a lot of times with film scores, I feel like there's so much generated that's exciting musically that can have a bigger life and that can expand and develop. And so in some cases, like one performance that I put on at the Sundance Film Festival incorporated 2 live computer improvisers and a string quartet. And all the materials that were being sourced were derived from a particular film score of mine. And it was like an hour-long set. It was kind of like almost like a concert stage piece. That's the way I conceived of it, in a way, with different movements. And sometimes so film scores, just for starters, are a place where you can take a theme and reimagine its tone, its tempo, its pacing. And so that's part of, I think, something that I love about it is like it's already a place where you're doing theme and variations and mutations. And so this kind of puts it to a logarithmic degree where you're taking these already varied related elements and you're seeing how you can tell almost, definitely a more expanded story and sometimes very different stories within each movement. And so also it opens up this whole area that is really a lifelong area to explore of how to integrate a live ensemble with interactive computers. So in this case, I had a system where the players had to be very nimble and available to change on a dime, and I would cue them in with certain materials, but the tempo, the key, all sorts of different things would be, it's almost like everybody was part of a big network, right? A big computer network, or a big human network, depending on how you look at it.
Wow, sounds great. Yeah, and I've speaking of Sundance, I've read that you were very highly awarded at the Sundance Institute, or from the Sundance Institute, and so I just have to say congratulations and wow, and how does it feel to be honored?
Well, thank you very much. My fellowship there at the Composers Lab was actually happened quite a while ago, very early in my scoring career, and I think it was definitely a boost in that recognition, as well as the actual experience, of course, of going to the lab, were meaningful and kind of affirming my path early on. And Sundance and BMI have a variety of kind of development and granting programs that I've been very lucky to be a part of that kind of support into the independent development of a voice, which I think is has had long-lasting effects in the industry, because many people, I mean, not a lot of people, right? It's only, I think, 6 per year, for instance, go through the fellowship program. But, there's an impact that has as people continue on and build careers, that affirming of originality and a unique point of view. Mm-hmm. And, I had the opportunity to go back to the labs to do some advising a few years ago, and that also was very meaningful and rewarding.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I've also read that you worked with on the score from Brian Tyler for the movie Now You See Me, and how was the work, and were you able to bring some of yourself into the performance?
Well, the Now You See Me credit is for it's interesting cue where it's the Beethoven violin concerto. It's actually a narratively significant moment, and it's like this hypnotic moment where that piece is used. So it was kind of combining my classical training with storytelling and sound design.
Yeah, you are a composer, performer, producer, singer, and so much more. And have you have a favorite part of all this?
I mean, I guess to me, it all is combined in the idea of composition. And it's like the conception of something that then becomes material. All of the things that you mentioned a part of this, you're making music, you're making something from the void. So it's all part of that continuum to me.
Mm-hmm. And you're also a guest lecturer. And I was just wondering if there's anything you haven't done before, but would like to do?
I have a long list of musicians that I'd love to work with and have be part of my scores. I think, as a parent of younger children, recently I have not been performing quite as much, but I think as time goes on, I would love to. And also as we emerge into a healthier stage of the world where the pandemic is not so limiting, I do love live performance. I would love that to expand. And, I also have stories I'd like to tell. if at some point, at various points, I envision creating some illustrated books and animated films, and there's a lot of choreography that has gone unrealized in my brain. So I think that just like continuing the expansion of my storytelling activities is also a big one. But there's just in the realm of music, there's so many. There's just such a wide and deep well, and so I hope to always continue to deepen my knowledge of different styles and musics, and get to interact with master musicians, so that I just feel like it's a great privilege, and hopefully I'll get to do much more of that as I continue.
And if you could choose, do you have something like a dream project?
Well, I think definitely up there would be one from my childhood. Kind of creating an animated musical, including the story and the character design. And of course the songs and the score, just kind of realizing stories from scratch. That would definitely be up there.
Wow. And what can you tell about your current and next projects?
So currently I'm wrapping up a feature for Amazon and Blumhouse, which is a really great film. I don't think I'm at liberty to share the title of it at present, but hopefully if you follow me on IMDb, when it's announced, I'll be able to share that. But we're kind of at the very end of the scoring process for that. And it's a drama thriller with some I think a very interesting musical palette. And I have a couple other film projects waiting for me after I complete that. And then we'll see. And of course, The Sinner season 4 is on the horizon, and dates to be revealed, I guess.
Great. So good luck for all that.
Thank you.
And one more little thing before the end. I call 5 terms, and you tell me what comes to your mind.
Okay.
Film music.
Lyrical narrative.
Singing.
Unfettered expression.
Instruments.
Microcosm.
Hollywood.
Possibility.
And hobbies.
Swimming, hiking. These are kind of non-creative hobbies, right? Because creative things are not hobbies for me. And I'll say binging some great shows.
Great. Yeah, that was it. And
Great.
Have a great day, and thank you very, very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.